everyone. I think we're starting. I'm Cynthia Becht from Archives and Special Collections, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our wonderful program tonight. This is a program which is, for me, more than one thing. It is, of course, the kickoff and launch event for our Special Collections Gallery exhibition, Strange Matters, brilliantly curated by graduate student Trinity Catlin. It's also, I'm hoping, a sneak preview of a sort of the upcoming haunting of Hannon Library, Secret, Dark, and Midnight Things, masterminded by our wonderful partner in crime, Professor Kevin Wetmore of the Department of Theater Arts. Yes. Thank you, Kevin. And the haunting is not this weekend, but it's next Friday and Saturday, so we hope to see you. And I also see tonight as a celebration of two creative souls who will share with us how they took a common theme and made their very own kind of magic out of it. So, how did we get here? Very short version. For over a decade, the library has played hard with our good friend from Theater Arts, and we have followed a kind of formula, and this is how it goes. A graduate student from the English department spends a year with Special Collections. Thank you, English department. And from that year, they end up crafting our fall semester exhibition. Then Kevin Wetmore asks us, usually a year in advance, so what's the next year's theme for the exhibition? And he usually asks me so early, I'm kind of just fumbling around saying, I think we are headed around this topic maybe. And no matter what theme I come up with, Kevin's response is always, that's great, I'm on it. And off he goes pinging with the theme, and the next year rolls around and we have an exhibition and an amazing haunting that is inspired by it. And it's always, the next haunting is my new favorite haunting. It's so great. But for some reason last year, I began to wonder, and I don't know why, maybe I was feeling that we were getting upon the 10-year itch or something, but I began to wonder, what if we gave Kevin what he wanted to do for the haunting? We'd never done that before. What might be the theme that would come from him? And then what would happen with the exhibit if that reverse thing happened as well, and we handed our graduate student, just newly hired for the year, the challenge of working with a haunting theme for the first time ever. So I think I kind of experimented on these two without kind of thinking about it, but it rolls around that Kevin asks, so what's next year's theme? And my answer was, well, what is next year's theme? Your turn. And I swear, I thought he was going to go away and mull on it, take a little while. It takes us weeks sometimes to come up with an exhibit theme. But I remember watching his face, and it took him half a beat. I mean 1 second maybe, and he shot out the theme. Should I mention it? Or okay. Shakespeare. I remember that just immediately, and I'm, oh, okay. So here comes Trinity, joining our team, and I pass along Professor Wetmore's theme to her. It's going to be Shakespeare. And it may be that we are about to learn that these two have many things in common. I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but one thing I do know that they share is how quickly they both grab a concept and start playing. Because I gave Trinity the theme, and I don't know how long, it was just so immediate, where she thought about it and she said something like, okay, I know exactly where this exhibit is going to head. And then off she went. So that was such a pleasure and a joy to feel that these two have such a strong feeling for this common theme. But we didn't talk a lot amongst each other. We visited once, and then they were on their own to weave their own kind of magic. So tonight we'll get to hear from them about their creative journeys in the fun, informal style that has been a hallmark of our exhibit/haunting playtime. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to our two creators. Kevin Wetmore. our esteemed partner and creator of the Haunting of Hannon Library, is a professor of theater arts, as I've mentioned, and also an author and or editor of books with some of my favorite titles, like Eaters of the Dead, Myths and Realities of Cannibal Monsters, Shakespearean Echoes, Shakespeare and Youth Culture, The Streaming of Hill House, and I love my copy at home, and The Many Lives of the Purge, and many, many others. Kevin Wetmore is also the artistic director of Shakespeare on the Bluff, and I might add, an actor who steals a lot of those plays. I thought your Yaga was great until I saw Dog's Body this summer, which was my new favorite. Awesome. He is co-chair of the Los Angeles chapter of the Horror Writers Association, and of course, the writer-director of The Haunting of Hannon for the last 12 years. When you told me that number, I was blown away. It's been that long. Kevin is an Aquarius who likes long walks on the beach and scary things and Shakespeare. And now Trinity Catlin, our curator of the exhibition which we launched tonight, Strange Matters. Trinity is a current master's student in the English department, a teaching fellow and graduate student. She's been a co-head editor of the student journal, LA Miscellany. Her debut chapbook of poetry, Bone Hunting, was published this past summer. Congratulations, Trinity. Trinity is a Leo who enjoys a good show, a good meal, and a good night's sleep. Please join me in welcoming our two wonderful lovely.
How do you want to start?
How do you want to start? Do you want a mic?
Oh,
You guys
no,
hear?
I was going to say, unless you need it for the camera, John is saying we need it for the camera, otherwise I was going to say, I have training, I need no mic. But, can you hear me? Yes, you can, okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Is that functional?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, cool. So what we talked about was doing a sort of mutual interview here, where we're just going to ask each other questions, mostly gotcha, because it's like a debate, and try and trap each other in misstatements. So I'm kidding, of course. This is just going to be a fun conversation about a thing of mutual love. So do you want to start? Would you like me to start?
I mean, I have a variety of questions that I prepared in anticipation for this, but I think, I don't know, because as I was working on the exhibit, my fascination with Shakespeare has always been just how people have morphed Shakespeare into this sort of ghostly figure that is representing something different for everyone. Sure. And I feel like The Haunting this year is going, I'm curious about your process of how you're adapting Shakespeare, what liberties you're taking, and how close are you keeping to the text, what's different, what's the same, and why, sort of.
Okay, so that's your only question for the night, because that's going to take about 45 minutes to answer. There's so many wonderful things there. That's a great question. Yeah, liberties are being taken left, right, and center. We're going, having a lot of fun with it. Partly, I'm going to answer this question in a roundabout way, since as Cynthia explained, they were kind enough to let me select the topic, and so it made it easier for me to say, oh, let me mix my loves, and that'll be less work, and the more fool I. I'm haunted by Shakespeare. Shakespeare sort of haunts me. He shows up constantly in my life. As mentioned, I run the Campus Shakespeare Festival, but even before that, I've written books on Shakespeare, I've done a ton of Shakespeare. I've been acting in Shakespeare since I was 18 because I have a beard and can speak beautifully. But I'm also just haunted by the idea how much this person and his work shows up in our culture, the ways in which he shows up, and as a big horror fan, I'm also fascinated with how horrific Shakespeare is. That across the canon, including the comedies, you have something like 78 onstage deaths and several hundred offstage deaths. And these are not easy or simple deaths. There are witches, there are monsters, there are ghosts, there is exit pursued by a bear. And that's one of the offstage ones where a man is chased off stage by a bear. Everyone knows that famous stage direction, exit pursued by a bear. Paid less attention is the follow-up where this guy comes in and says, yeah, I just watched this guy get mangled to death by a bear down the beach. Yeah, oh, he's dead all right, and the bear's eating him. Anyway, here's my story. And so, Shakespeare sort of has this almost horror comedic moments, but also the darkness of Titus Andronicus, Richard killing his nephews and hiding their bodies in the tower. And Shakespeare has at least 5 plays in which ghosts actually show up, and many more in which they're mentioned. So I find Shakespeare haunting, I am haunted by Shakespeare, and a lot of my thinking has been shaped by a scholar named Marvin Carlson, who has a wonderful book called The Haunted Stage, in which he says the theater itself is a memory machine. And he's guided by a line from Hamlet, has this thing appeared again tonight? The idea of a haunting is just this sort of recurring performance of something that's no longer alive. And that's what we do in the theater, has this thing appeared again tonight, this presence that isn't real and yet is somehow. Not to mention the fact that the theater is a place in which the dead speak. Shakespeare has been dead over 400 years now, and yet every summer his words echo through Lawton Plaza, that when we're performing, every actor is a medium, every performance is a seance because the dead speak through us. And I think that's both incredibly creepy and incredibly cool. And it allows me to think that every play, like even Peter Pan, is supernaturally horrific. And that tells you far more about me than you probably needed to know. So in terms of thinking about writing this, I was thinking about the horror of Shakespeare, about the presence of stuff that can scare people. And one of the hallmarks I like to think of The Haunting of Hannon over the past 12 years has been, we do have jump scares because they're expected, but a jump scare is easy. It's just a physiological response to being startled. And instead, I want you to go home in a few hours and be very uneasy and have nightmares. I don't want to startle you, I want to fill you with dread. I just want you disturbed, and you walk out of here. So to me, it's sort of, what do we do with that? How do we do that? And how do we do that with Shakespeare? Because part of the problem is, if you've ever seen a production of Macbeth, and I can say that because we're not in a theater, it's not scary. It hasn't been scary for centuries. When you're high school to Shakespeare, yeah, it's a lot of dark, a lot of black clothing, but the witches are just like Stevie Nicks impersonators. Prophecy, prophecy, prophecy. I'm wearing black lace and I'm twirling, and you're like, that's not disturbing. It's nice, but 3 sophomores looking like the Gypsy videos just aren't going to scare me. The Ghost of Banquo is just this kid from my history class. So how do we take Shakespeare and really sort of find the horror that was there for its original audiences? And that's, I guess, this is a very roundabout answer to your question, how we find the horror in Shakespeare and some of his associate plays. We're doing a scene from, for example, The Duchess of Malfi by John Webster, which is Queen Elizabeth, everything is sort of light and fun, and then King James takes over and everything gets super dark, super fast. That's what Macbeth is from. That's when you start introducing not just murders, ghosts, and monsters, but you have the second major tragedy, which has like necrophilia, mysterious morticians. It gets really strange, and I just picture King James in the audience being like, "Oh, that's great, more of that, I like the crazy stuff." James was fascinated and horrified by witches. He was a judge at witch trials. So there's this whole history of this strong tension, especially after James takes over, and the supernatural is real and we have to be horrified. And things like Reginald Scott, The Discovery of Witchcraft, is like, has anyone here ever actually been turned into a newt? Have any of you ever flown across the moon at midnight? Yeah, me neither. So maybe there aren't witches, maybe? Has anyone actually seen a full torso apparition, class 5 vapor, any of the things from Ghostbusters? No. So in The Discovery of Witchcraft, a book from 1584, this guy's like, I don't think any of this stuff is real. And the people who are like putting people on trial for this need to have their heads examined. So there's this strong tension during this period of whether or not things are real. And that's one of the things we're playing with in the script is the supernatural real or not? Is this person really turning into a werewolf or not? Is this person really possessed? If someone comes out and they're like, I'm a ghost, you go, no, you're a junior at makeup. But if someone on stage is like, okay, let's talk to this person, everyone in the audience is like, wait, what's going on? And immediately you're sort of on alert. And rather than, we can't compete with film for special effect extravaganzas, but what we have is liveness. What we have is presence. What we have is a group of 8 people that we're bringing into the classroom next door with all the lights out and telling them, light it with your cell phones, and you're going to be in the same space with someone who's not quite right. And here I'm going to give a quick demonstration because, again, if I'm a film, if you're watching this on TV, I'm just sitting here and you're listening to what I'm saying. But the second I start moving towards you, suddenly Shakespeare gets a lot more scary, doesn't he? Because the person, the possessed person, the monster, the thing, whatever it is coming towards me right here and making eye contact and like doing the Kubrick stare. But some actors are here and they've heard that. Do the Kubrick stare now. Oh, okay. And our instinct as human beings is just like, what the, I don't like that. I do not like that at all. Okay, now I have the effect that I wanted. You're not just jump scared, you don't like what you're experiencing. And as long as I'm being scholarly, I'm just gonna throw out a shout to Noel Carroll here, who says, things like this, what we do here, is the weirdest thing ever, because one, we know it's not real, all right? That's not a werewolf, that's not a ghost, she's not really possessed, we're in a library. And two, nobody actually wants to be scared. No one's like walking down an alley in Hollywood, hears footsteps behind them and goes, I wish I had popcorn. This is great. You're never home and you hear like a door opening going, fantastic. I was wondering what we were gonna do tonight. No, we don't actually like being scared. And yet, hundreds of people come here every year to experience this. And so that's sort of the fun of it. I'm gonna throw out one last quotation. I'm not even sure I'm answering the question anymore, but Guillermo del Toro says that horror is a roller coaster for the soul. And roller coasters don't make sense. They're just senseless velocity in a circle. You're gonna go really fast for no reason in a circle, and you're gonna stand in line 45 minutes for the privilege of doing so. And yet, that's what we want every October. We go to see these things, we go to experience these things, we go to Universal, we go to Knott's. We go anywhere to have this frisson of fear, because it's fun when you know it's not really that scary. So I love it when students come through, walk through, and the Loyola will interview them, and they're like, how was it? It was good, it was interesting. I really loved like the stuff on the Chinese spirits. I thought that was so cool. And I'm like, what happened? The guy in the basement frightened me. I've done my job. So in terms of looking at Shakespeare, we're looking for those scary moments, but also looking for sort of those meta moments where we can explore, what is it about this that does or doesn't scare us? And why doesn't it scare us? So some of the actors laugh because there are scenes where we're sort of in the middle of a scene from Macbeth or Hamlet, and an actor then breaks the fourth wall and goes, by the way, the witches in Macbeth are never actually called witches. They're referred to as the Weird Sisters, a word that means fate. Not weird like strange, but weird like they know what's going to happen to you. I foresaw your death last night. Anyway, everyone's like, wait, what? What? You what? Yeah, just gotcha. And because we're at a university, I feel a slight bit of obligation to educate. And so even though it's about Shakespeare, we have, for example, Chinese Shakespeare, we talk about Shakespeare in Ireland, we talk about Shakespeare all over the globe. And so unlike most haunted houses, you learn stuff here while we're trying to scare the crap out of you. So it's very Ignatian.
Yep.
Does that answer your question?
I think so.
My turn.
Okay.
What were your criteria for the things that you picked to go in the specific exhibit?
Well, okay, that's a good question. We've met once.
We did.
We've spoken twice. Once was on Zoom, once was in person.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you said, which you repeated, I think earlier, was that you said something and you were just so emphatic about it. You were like, I'm haunted by Shakespeare. And I was like, it just stuck with me. I wrote it down in my notebook. And I was like, haunted by Shakespeare. And I took that very, very literally. And I took it like possibly too literally. And the criteria that I wanted to establish a global timeline as best as I could with the space and, artifacts that we have, of how Shakespeare globally has haunted individually in the theater, in culture, and has through colonialism, through race relations in the US, and through all of these different ways. And it's very complicated. It's not just this beautiful, amazing thing, but it's haunting in positive and negative ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally feel haunted by Shakespeare purely through just high school and college English requirements. And so every year I'm reading Shakespeare, and I have such an incredible, and I'm very grateful now, but I have a really great familiarity with the plays, and so I had a bunch of ideas going in about how Othello as this narrative and as this character has haunted across the sea in the US, and that story has sort of embedded itself within the US culture in these really problematic ways, but then also people have looked at that specter and taken it and rewritten it and done amazing things with that text. And so I was kind of considering what you were doing, which is creating this new Shakespeare for us at Hannon. And I wanted to represent how people have been doing this practice for a really long time. And that criteria is very loose, and so it was a struggle to look at all of the stuff that we have and to email Cynthia and be like, hey, I just found this, what do you think? Could you buy it maybe? And I don't know, and this is why I think we should. And so it was this combination of like choosing a lens in which to view the plays and then seeing what we had and like sort of having that dialogue with myself over the course of a year. But purely on this like stemming from what you said, which is like, I'm haunted by Shakespeare. And I feel like that's somewhat universal. And I think whether people like to admit it or not, it's embedding itself in culture in this really, sometimes like subversive way and sometimes really overtly. But yeah, it was long and complicated and also very simple. And there's certain sections that I'm really so proud of, and I learned a lot, I think, throughout this process of how, like, because I have a very, like, Eurocentric view of Shakespeare, which is like, okay, these are what the plays mean, this is what this symbolizes, but then, like, Shakespeare in Latin America means something entirely different, and that haunting is very, very different, and understanding that was, like, going through like JSTOR and like going through articles and then like figuring that out, and then like it just was like rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole for months. And but stemming from this like sort of like hauntological understanding of like this phenomena, because it's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Shakespeare wasn't the most popular writer even at the time. And so it's been through like the production of the folios and like these like repeated performances and this reinvestment by the Romantics and so on and so on and so on, that he's still so like pervasive in our culture and across the world and globally. And it's through the Colonial Project, it's through our own performances that he's here. And he wasn't even that big at the time. And so there's this weird negotiation that I think we're all having with him, whether we like it or not. And you obviously do phenomenal things and you do enjoy it, and so I think that, and I do too, but it's, I wanted to represent that history in a way where like haunting is both a struggle and also something that is like almost sublime in a way. And like it transcends time, it does a lot of things that are really complicated. But yeah, if that answers your question.
No, it does, and it sparks just a whole bunch of thoughts in terms of, you know, we're talking about haunted by Shakespeare, and yes, I think culturally we are as well. As artists, we're haunted by Shakespeare. And it's such a, thrown out so casually, well, it's not Shakespeare. You know, Shakespeare is just this sort of touchstone in our culture for what culture is, and he's not even ours. Shakespeare's not American, but by God, we've made him American.
Totally.
And the same is true in like Japan and China and Nigeria and South Africa and Germany. These are countries in which I've sort of worked, and I'm like, yeah, there's this use of Shakespeare, but it's not the same as it is here. And of course in England, it's old Shakespeare, but at the same time, a haunting is not necessarily a fun thing to experience.
Right.
Because you're struggling with the past that is still there and won't go away. And so that's why I use the phrase, I'm haunted by Shakespeare. And we're haunted by Shakespeare because as a horror fan, I love hauntings. I don't actually want to experience a ghost.
Right.
And I'm haunted by Shakespeare, and that's a choice that I've embraced. You know, I've chosen to live in a haunted house, but I'm recognizing that that haunting is the past constantly incurring on the present, and not always in a positive way. And that's something that I fight with as a Shakespearean. Am I perpetuating some of these things that are highly problematic? And it's one of those things that everyone who runs a Shakespeare festival thinks about. Should we do Merchant of Venice, for example? Because it's incredible anti-Semitic content, makes it really problematic, even though Shylock himself is presented as a character that's like, look at the situation you've all put me in. You can't extract that from all the ugliness of the play. I think it's impossible to do Taming of the Shrew now in any meaningful way that isn't profoundly offensive. So it's one of those things. And also in terms of which Shakespeare plays get done, it's culturally bound. Everybody loves Hamlet, we all love Romeo and Juliet, we all love Midsummer Night's Dream, but no one's like, hey, when are you guys doing Timon of Athens? Because no one's ever even heard of that play. Right. So it's a complicated haunting. I love the nuance and the thoughts and the things that you're bringing out of that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a thought that I took a phenomenal course a couple of years ago, just purely on Othello, and then we read like appropriations and adaptations and all these things, and and it's such a complicated play, but I think it's strange because like performance-wise it's really complicated, but I think textually it brings up a lot of really important conversations, and it's like this dialogue of like the canon, the literary canon is like so complicated in like English scholarship now, but it does invite these like the way that Othello has like played a part in like history, in US history, in like its relationship to like minstrelsy and like the performance of minstrelsy, and then like Paul Robeson's like classic performances later, and how the reception of that was, I think, historically significant, and like it's just been instrumental in like the construction of like US like social relations, and it's been, and so it's like it's hard to say whether to or to not look at it, for lack of a better phrase, and like, because I think it doesn't invite a really important dialogue, and that's a question that, like, especially taking on this theme and like being like, okay, I'm getting thrown into this, what do I want to do? I wanted to make space, I think, for that like discourse, and because I think my favorite play, which I wish I got to like bring up in this exhibit, but I love Much Ado About Nothing. And that is, like, I love the character Beatrice. I loved watching performances of it. There's been really, like, radical performances of it. I think I'm thinking of, I think the Atlanta Players. I don't know if that's the right name of the company. They did a great performance of it. But there's, like, elements of radical like, gender in Shakespeare. There's things that I think have a lot of value that are worth looking at, but it's hard to be in negotiation with, like, the 21st century and, like, what people are looking for. And it's, like, that's where I think adaptation and appropriation sort of, like, inserts itself and makes it alive in some sort of way.
Sure, I would even add on top of that, beyond adaptation and appropriation, production choices in terms of, if we're going to, no one does any text uncut because it would last forever. And there are lines like, it is the pasture that large the robber's sides, that even Shakespeareans are like, we have no idea what that means, just saying. So in production, it's a lot harder to do stuff like that. But it's for me, why I do Shakespeare still is finding those very human moments and recognizing this emerged out of a particular culture, but this speaks to us now. And this makes sense to us now. And that's, I was talking about why we do some plays and we don't do others. So King John is very rare, but Romeo and Juliet is very popular, and that's because we understand, sort of young crushes and kids getting into trouble, and the sort of confluence of influence around the English monarchy at the time of perhaps does not hold nearly as much appeal. But for example, with Othello, I know of Japanese adaptations, I know of African adaptations, all these different ones that sort of render it into culture. A brilliant Cambodian one called Simriticek. And yet as a horror guy, I go, oh, this is a horror story. It's about a man who gaslights his boss into murdering his own wife. Like, this is amazing. And then when we add all of the other elements on top of it, the element of is Iago racist? This is a racist culture that's clearly written into the text. What does this speak to us now? And we don't necessarily have to shy away from the horror of it. That's kind of the point, is that this is the inevitable product of a culture that devalues this person based on his ethnicity, rather than his contributions to that society. So speaking as an artist, that's the playground that I want to play in. And even when we're doing something fun like Much Ado, as you pointed out, even when we're doing something fun like creating a haunted house in a library, the audience still walks out thinking, that feeling of dread is not, a jump scare is nothing, it's physiological, there's no thought behind it. Dread is, I've made you think stuff. And you're walking out of here reflecting on it. And it's not just, I'm worried that that person's going to follow me home. It's, what does that mean? Like, I've never really thought about it that way. And now I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, if you're uncomfortable, that means something's bothering you. And that means as an artist, I've done my work. And I fully admit, as someone who played Iago, one night I walked down to the front of the stage with the speech, and what's he that says I play the villain? Where I've just said all sorts of horrible things to Othello about his wife, and he goes off furious, and he says, I'm the bad guy. And this woman in the front row just goes, that's Snake! That was like heroin. I'm like, one, is addicted, but two, yeah, you hate me right now. Wonderful, I had an effect, and it's bothering you that I'm doing these things. Good, it should. You shouldn't be there going, well, he's doing a really good job. I want you, man. So if you're having that emotional reaction, and then you think about it later, yay me. As an artist, I've done my job. I've made you feel, I've made you think. Tell me something better than that.
No, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking of, too, in regards to just horror and this reaction, what is the line that Beatrice says something like, if I were a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace. And I think that image of, like, because it's just in the language, I mean, it's just the two of them on stage, I believe, but
Right,
it's like,
there's a Benedict talking.
yeah, but it's this, but I think the image of that and the horror of that, and like, I think when I first heard that line spoken out loud and performed, I like clutched my pearls. I was like, oh my God, that's an insane thing to say. It's an insane image. It's like the publicity of it. And I just sat there like going through like, what does this line mean? And it's like, and like the play had progressed. I was like, and I was lost in that moment for a while. And it's, but there's this element of, yeah, performance choice that I think really shifts that dialogue and brings it like, and I think I forget because I sit in an office and I read books all the time and I'm not watching the shows as much, but that those performance choices are so crucial in recontextualizing, and there's this like culture is infusing into the stage and into these performances in these really beautiful ways that like it's hard to encapsulate with like just text. I think like Cynthia was saying that it's like a very book heavy exhibit, and it is. And because it's like, how do you show this negotiation, whereas like the haunting, it's like you're seeing this negotiation happen like in real time, and that I think is just a really fantastic way to be in dialogue with this ghost of Shakespeare and this person who has been dead. It's like, but it brings that sort of person back to life as far as we know him. And
Well, the haunt requires us to be in the house with him.
yeah.
To your point. And just a comment on your favorite line from Much Ado, because to me that's the joy of Shakespeare, is these lines that are impossible to say, and that when you say them, you're like, the audience is going to laugh at this. My favorite is from Hamlet, where Hamlet and Laertes are wrestling over the grave of Ophelia, and Hamlet says to Laertes, "What wouldst thou do to prove thy love for Ophelia? Wouldst eat a crocodile? I wouldst." Who comes up with that? Who, when they're fighting their dead girlfriend's brother at her funeral, is like, "I would eat a crocodile for her, would you?" And yet, when you stop to think about it, it's like, wow, these guys are going to dark places in their head. And sometimes you can make it work, and sometimes you can't. I have yet to see a production, for example, of Titus Andronicus that doesn't actually draw laughs during sort of the big reveal. Even Patrick Stewart couldn't put it off. They're like, where are my sons? There they are, baked in that pie. And you're like, no, that is not a serious line. There they are, baked in that pie, gets a laugh every time, even though it's horrific. You just experienced involuntary cannibalism. Her children have been killed, and she ate them not knowing it. And then Titus says, there they are, baked in that pie. And everyone's like, okay. It's you can't make it work, and yet it works because by that point, everyone's gone insane. And limbs have been chopped off, tongues have been pulled out. These people have endured every kind of atrocity, and yet, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they're like, let's keep going darker.
Right, absolutely.
And that's, we have a Titus scene from in the hospital.
Do you really?
Oh my God.
I wanted to get the insight.
I don't want to give away too much, but yes, we do have a Titus.
Yeah, I wanted to know which plays you decided to bring into the haunting.
There's a lot of Macbeth. Partly because I want to make that play work, and I very rarely have seen it work. So I want to sort of bring it back. We've got Scary Midsummer Night's Dream. We have, actually, there are some Easter eggs this year, references to previous haunts. Because once you've been doing something for over a decade, you're like, oh, let's just bring that back. Sequelitis. I don't want to give away too much more. We have 2 or 3 non-Shakespearean plays that are from the same period, that are engaging in that same sort of the horror of the English Renaissance. So I mentioned earlier, I can say this one, we're doing the Duchess of Malfi. We've got some histories in there. We have Hamlet. We have a couple of Hamlets, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And then we do the college show at night for students and neighbors. We do a family-friendly version in the afternoon. And that to me is always sort of the fun of it is, this is for 5 to 10-year-olds, so we can't be dragging out, they don't get Titus. But what they do get is sort of the witches from Macbeth squabbling with each other. And every year we end with a Dr. Seuss mashup. Like last year, Family Friendly ended with The Silence of the Lorax, in which FBI agent Clarice Luhu goes to visit Dr. Hannibal Lorax. And we had a wonderful student who's dressed in sort of a fuzzy orange jumpsuit with the Hannibal Lecter mask on, going, I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees. And that's as much for the parents have just gone through 45 minutes of silliness, so here's something that you'll appreciate and the kids will too. So this year, it's the tragedy of McYertle the Turtle. The story of Macbeth is told through Yertle the Turtle, which is very Macbethian in the first place. And the guy who finally defeats Yertle is named Mac. So we have a turtle named Mac Duff. And it's sort of a little present for the actors to just have fun with. The family-friendly scenes alternate between sort of spooky story and just kind of silly. And so that's sort of the fun of it. So this year was, what Shakespeare do you give to kids? And I overheard you talking earlier about your first experiences with Shakespeare as a child.
Yes.
And especially a lot of us who are in theater find Shakespeare early. My daughter, who was here earlier, just did her first Shakespeare role at the age of 7, and she was one of the Windsor Fairies in Merry Wives of Windsor. And so, she's growing up with a Shakespeare dad, so she's doomed. But it's that, when do you first encounter Shakespeare? How do you encounter it? And when do you realize that you actually encountered Shakespeare a lot earlier than you thought you did? You just didn't know it was Shakespeare, because when you think about how many cartoons make reference, think about how much popular culture revolves around this stuff, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Little Bit of Lear, are all so infused in our popular culture that we're not even aware we're getting Shakespeare when we get him. Further part of the haunting. So it's how do we make those normal moments horrific? How do we make those horrific moments normal, which makes them even more frightening? And there's a lot of exploration of the horrific themes of Shakespeare in terms of murder, prophesying. When you look at Henry VI, where Bolingbroke and John Southwell and Mother Jourdain summon a spirit to find out who's going to win the War of the Roses. And it turns out the Steelers will, 21-7. Might be confusing two different texts. Just looking at all these sort of, finding some moments in Shakespeare that are unexpectedly spooky, that are unexpectedly disturbing. And because Shakespeare does have these sort of very dark moments in plays that aren't that dark. I mentioned earlier The Winter's Tale, which isn't a particularly dark play, but a guy gets killed and mauled by a bear just off stage, and is treated ridiculously casually. But when you think about what all these people have actually endured, Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies aren't that far apart. They're people suffering. And if their suffering is far enough away from us, we find it really funny. Bottom finds himself transformed into a donkey, which I think that's Kafka, right? You wake up in the morning and you become an animal. No one's like, this is awesome! And so that's horrifying to suddenly have that transformation. And so let's look at that as we're laughing at it because we've learned Bottom is an ass, so it's an appropriate transformation. But if that were like your partner, you would not be there laughing, be like, poetic justice, wonderful. What the hell? So finding those moments in it and re-horrifying them, I guess is the term. And so that's kind of been my job, is finding the obvious, Macbeth spooky, Hamlet spooky, but finding those things of, there's one in the family, unfriendly one at night, which is actually a complete deconstruction of Hamlet. And, here's what's going on in Hamlet, but you want to know what's really scary about that? And sort of explaining why what you think of as Hamlet is far more disturbing than actually it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Promise.
I don't, it's so interesting. I've always found Midsummer to be terrifying. I think the act of forgetting is terrifying.
Oh, yes.
Just in any regard, the woods are scary. Donkeys are scary, just generally. I think it's all, incredibly frightening. And Hamlet too, as I was curating the exhibit, and I want to be conscious of time too, I don't know how long we've been talking, but I was reading this really dense cultural criticism called Spectres of Marx by Jacques Derrida. And it's the first 40-something plus pages are just unpacking what the ghost in Hamlet is and what it looks like and how we're looking at it, and it's just repeatedly time is out of joint over and over and over again, and it's in reference to communism, but I think the understanding of he's building this large metaphor about communism and whatever. But it's this idea of something like sitting in this in-between state, and like that it may not even be his father in the first place, and we don't know that, and like he doesn't know that, and it's like you're having the armor sort of on the outside signaling that, but you can't see his face, and so like all of this like construction built around the ghost and like what the ghost represents is frightening because it's not as it seems ever, and it's also exactly as it seems because you participated in observing it and using it as a catalyst for something. And so there's a lot that's constructed around the idea of a ghost in the first place, and if I was less ambitious, I think I would have done just ghost, like just ghost, and that would have been the exhibit, because it's the materiality of that is so fascinating, and conveying that I think in performance is really strange.
Yes. Well, we're trying to convey a non-corporeal presence with a corporeal being.
Right.
And that's, for me, why ghosts frequently fail on stage, because that's not a ghost. It's a person.
Right.
And so, for me, that's one of the questions, particularly with something like this, where we have actors playing ghosts, is if you want to sort of reinvigorate this with something uncanny, you're going to give me Derrida, I'm going to give you Freud. How do we make it uncanny? How do we make this, how do we acknowledge the corporeality of the actor, but still make it disturbing? And for me, we can play the linguistic games in terms of the word ghost comes from the Middle English for the word fury. That ghosts, there are no gregarious ghosts. Casper the Friendly Ghost is a lie. Do not believe big comics. Ghosts come back, to quote Gillian Beers, ghosts are about the insurrection, not the resurrection of the dead. They come back because they're angry, because something is wrong, the time is out of joint. So the presence of a ghost isn't just the presence of grandma telling you everything's okay. The presence of a ghost is something is wrong in the world, and I'm letting you know. And so that's sort of the aspect of the haunt, is it creates an obligation. So when you think about every horror movie that's about haunting, that's what it is, oh, there's a strange old lady in our house, this is terrifying. No, something wrong was done, and we need to find out why. Every ghost story is really a mystery. Why are we being haunted? And the second you figure it out, you're like, oh, we just have to rebury her, we just have to find the guy who did the bad thing, or we just have to return the teddy bear to the crypt. And once you solve the mystery, the ghost is no longer angry. And so that's, I mean, all of Shakespeare's ghosts are angry. Julius Caesar, Richard III, Hamlet. Every ghost shows up being like, you need to kill someone.
Yeah.
So Derrida, I mean, it's a fascinating book, but his whole thing is the idea of hauntology, that the past continually is with us, and that is, the problem of the ghost is it is both present and not present. It is both real and not real. And we cannot even trust our own senses about what it is. And that's very hard to create with live bodies in a room.
Totally. Well, because also the ghost, what I found fascinating about the book was it's always in the context of this like future action. It's always sort of like the ghost is like always splayed between past, present, and future. It's arriving for the first time. It's always a return. The ghost is always a thing that is returning, but it's always arriving for the first time as that thing, which is a paradox and complicated and whatever. But it's always like predicting this like future violence that it's expected, and it will not leave until that future violence occurs, and so it's always living sort of in the future, but it's bound to the past. And it's that dialogue, and then like the corporeality of it, it's an incredibly complicated thing to translate, I think, in text, even though Shakespeare does a great job of that, and in performance. It's because you have to to reveal time in like a linear way, right. And to reveal time as not a linear thing, but in a linear way is very complicated.
But you've also nailed what the challenge is for this every time is, one, fear has to be fear of the unknown. The second we know what it is, we're no longer scared of it, because when we don't know, we're afraid. And once we figured out, oh, it's just a ghost, we can deal with a ghost. If I don't know what it is, I'm afraid. So you have to hold the reveal for as long as possible to keep people not knowing what's going on. But also, dread is built on what's going to happen, not what has happened. Once it's happened, it's trauma, and we process it. You can't process trauma you haven't had yet. You can only be afraid of it. So that's dread, and that's what we're trying to create here, is this sense of dread. And that's very hard to sustain over time. We also do something, there used to be a horror theater in France called the Grand Guignol, and a practice that I like to use is what they call hot and cold showers. So here's a kind of goofy scene that just relaxes you, and here's an intense scene that's going to terrify you, and now it's going to be silly again. And if you watch horror movies, you know that's the same exact pattern they follow. Is that the actual scare is the second one. The first one is just there to, like, you know, someone's walking down a hall and there's a noise behind the door and the music swells and they reach and they open it up and it's a cat. Like, oh, Jones, you stupid, you're a monster! And you relaxed because it was a cat and now we got you. So I don't mean to, like, speak ill of jump scares, but one, they're easy, and two, they follow a pattern and they get you and you're mad at yourself and you're like, I know they're gonna get me. And they get you. So, jump scare good, but how to maintain that tension, which is what Shakespeare does, is you know, when Ratcliffe and Catesby come in Richard III to Clarence, like, you know what we're here for, you know what we're gonna do, and it's how long until they kill him.
Yeah.
And they draw that out. The problem is they're drawing it out in iambic pentameter. And you can only draw that for so long before the answer's like, can we get something happening here?
Well, and I think when I watch performances of Hamlet too, that's how I feel, where I'm like, and that's how you're supposed to feel. It's just like, oh my God, can something stop talking? Like, please do something. And that's the whole, like, crux of the play. But it's like, it's hard to do, yeah, like the language is all, like, capable, I think, of incurring this dread of it continuing, and, like, also of this future action. But then it's like, yeah, anticipating, like, audience attention span is always, like, complicated. But it's, I think there's an item in the exhibit where it's just someone's scrapbook of performances of Hamlet, and it's just a new person every page over and over and over and over and over again. And I thought it was hilarious. Like, I was like, how many Hamlets can there be? How many times have somebody just, like, said the big monologue and done it and droned on? And it's like, not to speak ill of Hamlet, but it's just, that is just hours spent and of, like, audience members, like, negotiating their relationship with this figure that is always a new person, but always the same person, because it's a character and performance is so complicated.
And audiences know it. The worst thing to have to say on stage is to be or not to be. Because everyone, you know, that's the stairway to heaven moment. We're all waiting, we're all, come on, come on. And so every actor I know dreads having to say that line. And personally, as a director, that's why I do things like Pericles and Troilus and Cressida when I can, because I'm like, nobody knows this. So that's where, as we can really play with it, you know, because then, everyone has an idea of how Hamlet should be. Everyone has an idea of what Romeo and Juliet should be. And if you mess with that, they're miffed. No one walks in and saying, well, this better be the best Cymbeline I've ever seen. Everyone goes, I've not heard of that one. And it's fine, because Cymbeline, which is my favorite Shakespeare play, as long as we're confessing, I love it because I think, like, Shakespeare took a bunch of edibles and goes, I've written Hamlet, I've written Lear, now let's get cray. And just writes this play that in the last act are 37 separate revelations that are just insane. Half of them don't make sense, and everyone on stage is like, oh, that makes perfect sense, that tracks, yeah. Impossibilities happen. Jupiter flies in on a giant swan and leaves stone tablets for the protagonist. The bad guy dresses up as his stepsister's husband so that he can kidnap her and violate her in his clothing, and instead, her long-lost brothers capture him and decapitate him and take the head away, leaving the body, so she wakes up and sees her husband's clothing and goes, oh my God, he's dead. You're like, who would do any of it? Like, this is also needlessly complicated. And everyone in this world is like, yeah, no, that's what we do. So a play like that where the characters are all just, it's also impossibly wonderful and wonderfully impossible. I love that. Because as an artist, I can do so much with that and not worry about the audience going, well, it wasn't Hamlet. I don't know what that was. No one knows what that was, so yeah, have fun. And that's the dark unexplored corners of the canon for me are sort of the most fun ones. We all know Hamlet, we know Othello. Nobody's walking out of here going, Pericles.
Absolutely, yeah.
If I see one more Pericles, I'm gonna hit myself. No. I bet you don't have a book of 37 different Pericles I have seen.
No, I don't believe we do. Time?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you both very much. I learned a lot in my year with talking with Trinity. So But I don't think I knew that you had taken a course on Othello, so now I'm thinking, of course. I get that one.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm like bringing my books in to put in the display. I'm like, this is important. Yeah.
That's where you got
That is
Janice
wonderful.
ears.
But we do have a mic in the audience and time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. If any of this conversation produced a question on your part, if you'd like to find out about the creative process for the exhibit or more spoilers from the haunting and how that goes, great. Question in the back
Okay.
with the babies.
The babies have
Babies.
I just wanted to hear more about your purchasing and going to those like bookseller events, and wanted to hear a little bit more about that experience, Trinity. That's cool of you.
It was fun.
It was awesome. I think shopping for really old books is something that no one should have let me know that was possible. It's such a problem. I'm on the internet all the time looking at antique books. But it was really fun. Well, because I was also shopping for you a little bit, Liz, and so I had multiple objectives. But it also because I think that a part of my job as an intern for the department was to round out certain aspects of archives and special collections, just different, subjects and topics and things that could be used in classes. And so I had the pleasure of co-teaching some classes, and so I thought about, okay, how could this playbill of Paul Robeson be applied, in a classroom. And so I was shopping with that in mind, and then also shopping a little bit selfishly because I was like, I want this and this is cool. And I mean, with, of course, your guidance, Liz, and Sophia's guidance, it made my life a lot easier and less overwhelming to see amazing things all the time. But yeah, thank you.
Do you have a question?
Sure. I also like horror movies, and I don't know why, because fear is one of those things where when the 2 babies, if you scare them, they won't enjoy it or think it's funny or provoking. But when you get older, you start to enjoy putting yourselves in situations where it's scary. I mean, it's why people skydive and things like that. But do you have a perspective, either of you, or thoughts on why we enjoy it in the first place? And maybe cap it at 2 minutes, because you can probably go on for as long as you want on it.
You have surmised correctly. There are a bunch of people who have studied and written about this. So Noel Carroll, who I referenced earlier, refers to horror as a cognitive pleasure. It's the pleasure of discovery. It's the pleasure of solving the mystery of what the monster is or why it's here or what it's doing. I don't buy that one. I'm closer to Guillermo del Toro's It's a Roller Coaster for the Soul. Matthias Clausen, who is in Finland? No, Amsterdam, has written a whole series of books. He does experiments on how people fear, why people fear, what makes us afraid, and recreating. One of his goals has been to recreate the experience of an actual haunting, using low resonance frequencies, using the experience of trying to create what it's like to be in a place where you think there's a presence and you're feeling something happening, and what is that like. Why do we seek it out? There are a number of reasons in terms of especially horror cinema, social bonding, the idea of having survived something without actually having to go through trauma. We all went through the Blair Witch Project together, and we emerged on the other side and drank. It's that camaraderie of soldiers who have been to war without actually having to go to war. There are other theories in terms of it's particularly useful in terms of courtship, that horror movies allow you to get closer to each other with as a legitimate excuse, that it allows one to fall into socially determined gender roles. You can show how tough you are, and a woman who loves horror movies but is like, oh, I'm interested in this person, oh, protect me, that we can do those things, and you can't do that, for example, at Top Gun, or you can't be terrified at watching Gettysburg. And it's also rite of passage is another reason. particularly when you think about younger kids. Looking at my own kids, the kid who comes in is like, I saw an R-rated movie. And all the other kids are like, oh, I saw an R-rated movie. That idea of transgression. And partly, if I'm going to quote the academic theorist of The Simpsons, to quote Chief Wiggum, why are you children so fascinated by my forbidden closet of mystery? Everything in horror cinema and horror culture tends to be the stuff we're not supposed to want to see. So there's something sort of forbidden and that you're not supposed to like and not supposed to want. And I'll also quote a spokesman from Toho, who when asked why do people like Godzilla movies said, people want to destroy giant buildings, but they cannot. So they live vicariously through Godzilla. And I thought about that and thought, yeah, actually I watch Godzilla movies for the destruction, the spectacle of a giant kaiju destroying Tokyo every few years. And I don't want to really see Tokyo destroyed. I love that city, but man, that's a fun movie. And last, I think, but certainly not least, it's related to that whole sort of we're watching something we shouldn't. As the weird kid in my family, I find a lot of horror fans grew up as the one in their family that liked horror. And with parents who were very patient with a 10-year-old who's like, they're like, well, it's your birthday, what do you want to watch? The Exorcist. Not yet. But I want to see it. Because you're drawn to the dark, you're drawn to the forbidden, and you're drawn to, for me, now that I'm older and thinking about it, I'm like, I started doing horror when I was like 7 or 8. And my own daughter at that same age is reading Goosebumps and fascinated by monsters and all that. I think part of it is you're a monster kid, you're fascinated by monsters. And partly it's also you're wrestling already with your own mortality and you're wrestling with fear. I know a lot of kids who are like, the nice thing about Goosebumps is growing up with my intersectionality, I understood fear. And horror was a way for me to sort of understand and control it and go, okay, well, I'm not dealing with that. So horror helps us process trauma, helps us process the situation that we're in. And the irony is, horror makes us less afraid. And that's one of the reasons why I love it.
Thank you all. And thank you, Kevin,